Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we are continuing the first series I made here on the channel, and really haven't touched on about a month ago now, but we are finally starting it up again, and that is NHL teams with the brightest futures. And there's one team in particular that I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time, and that is the Habs, the Montreal Canadiens. So myself, alongside Matt, Scotian Canadien, you can check him out, another great hockey YouTuber who talks about strictly the Habs, has some great content there for all you Habs fans watching this, so make sure to check him out. I will have in the description down below, but we're going to be breaking down just why the Habs have a bright future, between a summary of what has happened with them really over this past year, between their previous season, how they fared in playoffs, all their offseason moves, their draft, their prospect pool, and why everything shapes up for them to have such a promising future. So as always, guys, make sure you stay all the way until the end of the video, find all the deets, all of our deets, if you will, regarding the Habs and why they have such a bright future, and get yourself comfortable, grab some popcorn, do whatever you need to do, because this is a very long video, but trust me, it'll be worth your while. And also make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you end up enjoying this kind of hockey content, if you want to see more hockey content like this going forward. But without further ado, guys, let's get right into this video. All right, hey Matt, thanks again so much for coming on the channel. When I thought about the Habs, you were definitely one of the first guys to come to mind, because I know that you have a great Habs following as it is on Scotian Canadien, but also because of the fact that you are a diehard Habs fan. Obviously, just look at your setup. It's awesome. Like, I'm very jealous. Yeah. I'm not even a Habs fan, but I just love every single thing about it. So for people that don't know you, give another quick background on yourself if you'd like, and then we will get right into this thing.
Right on. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Tyler. I've watched a bit of your content now, and I really enjoy it. You're a great speaker and really know your stuff. So yeah, no, I think this will be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to getting into it. And a little background on me, been a diehard Habs fan my whole life, just passed down from generation to generation, from my grandfather to my dad and then to me. And that's where like a lot of this stuff comes from. It's not just me collecting it. It's, hand-me-downs from, my grandfather and my dad. So, and then I started my YouTube channel just because I was finding, a few years ago that the Habs content nationally in Canada was kind of lacking. There was it was all negative, and we were going through a reset, and I just found that Habs fans couldn't find content, and me being one of them, that really gave us a fair shake. So I just figured, you know what, I got all this stuff to make it look pretty. And I got most of the knowledge, and I just figured I'd give it a go. And it's been 2 or 3 years since, and, continuing just to do it for fun, and I'm having a good time. And it's nice to be able to meet people like you and have fun conversations like this.
Yeah, no, that's great. I definitely think it's appealing when you're, say, either on YouTube or other platforms, and you're searching for something and you're like, you know what, I could probably do this just as good, if not better, than maybe some other people, and actually bring some light to the Habs, in what you were alluding to, how things were a lot more negative past couple years. I think we can all probably agree things are not the same anymore. What has happened with them over the past couple months has really been remarkable, and we will break down everything there is to know regarding them. But seriously, thank you again for coming on. But to just really dive in, we can start with basically a summary quick on what has happened with the Habs in the 2019-2020 season. As we know, they really had a solid season when it comes to developing their young talent, and also really didn't have the expectation to make playoffs. But because of the expanded format and the qualifying round, that's where really things took a great advantage for the Habs case. But if you look at them in 71 regular season games, they won 31, 31, and 9. So I remember a lot of those OT losses as well. Some of them were really kind of like nail biters, if you will. But then when the qualifying round happened, to see them beat the Penguins, if my memory serves me correct, they won that series 3-1. That was unbelievably impressive against a Pens team that really looked like one of the favorites to be a possible Stanley Cup contender this past year. So Habs, with their young talents and guys like Nick Suzuki and Jesperi Kotkaniemi, they really took major strides, took full advantage of having those months off, and then they really soared. And while they didn't pass the Flyers in the playoffs, it was unbelievably impressive for a team that really did not expect to make playoffs, and a team that was selling at the deadline as well, with getting rid of guys like Kovalchuk that they picked up for nothing, got some draft picks out of him, among others. Mark Bergevin, hats off to him and everything that they've done. But what are your initial thoughts on basically what has happened with them this past season?
So yeah, in 2018-19, we I would maybe overachieved a little bit and just barely missed the playoffs by a few points. We went on a very strong run towards the end of the season there, and I think it was like 7-1-1 or something like that in the last 9 or 10 games. And then following the following season, the one you're referring to, 2019-20, as Habs fans, we were hopeful that we could have a similar season. Realistically, again, we were going to be a bubble team. it wasn't a guarantee we'd get in or a guarantee we miss, but it ended up being a bit of a frustrating season after a really strong start, actually. And we had Drouin kind of firing on all cylinders until he got, train wrecked by Ovechkin. And then he missed most of the season after that. And when he returned, he just wasn't the same, and then we also dealt with the injuries to Gallagher and Armia all at the same time. Like our whole right wing depth kind of left us for a bit. And then, like you alluded to, we brought in Kovalchuk for nothing, brought in Scandella for a 4th round pick and tried to salvage the season. It didn't quite work out. But then, in the end, ended up being able to swap these guys for future assets. And Marc Bergevin really showed off some more of his strong asset management skills in making those deals. And then, kind of had some luck, some positives. Some sort of positive came out of the pandemic where the Habs had a chance to make the playoffs and get into the qualifying round. Still had to earn their way into the actual playoffs, and they managed to do it, knocking out the Pens, and that was an extremely exciting series. I got game reactions up on my channel for each of those games.
Yeah,
and
I've seen some of them. Yeah, no, they were
priceless. Specifically the last one. Got to celebrate it with my dad, who actually had a health scare earlier in that year. It was kind of an emotional moment for me.
Oh, wow.
So it was nice to be able to experience that, and something we wouldn't have had if it wasn't for the pandemic, which has, brought a lot of bad news to everybody, but for Habs fans, it gave us a little bit of excitement for a little bit. And, the Habs really showed that they can hang with the best of the best in the NHL when they're fully healthy. So Absolutely. They did that against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then they go in against the Flyers. And really, again, the Habs were not the favorite in that series either, but they kind of looked like it. And Philly really had to, trap us out and really hone in on their defensive skill to be able to shut us down. And it was a lot of really tight games. And unfortunately, there was 2 games. I think it was game 3 and 4 where we got shut out. And as I'm looking at those 2 games as really what took the series from us. So good on the Flyers for being able to tough that one out and get the win. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to what the Habs are going to bring here, because even just the last 2 seasons where, we almost made the playoffs and then we did on a technicality, we haven't had the deepest roster. Correct. And we've kind of needed to stay healthy to be able to achieve anything whatsoever. And then when we haven't, our lack of depth has been exploited. So now heading into this season, I think Bergevin has done a great job at filling the holes that needed to be filled.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. And, we're going to definitely get in depth here regarding all the acquisitions, all the moves that they made, because it's a night and day difference when it comes to their depth, both offensively and defensively and goaltending. And I think that's probably one of the biggest sleeper moves. And I'm really looking forward to talking about Jake Allen here. But before we get to that point, regarding them in particular and say their point getters this past season, Tomas Tatar has really done well for Montreal. And, there's a lot of rumors behind him because of his contract coming up and if he's going to stay long term with Montreal or not. But regardless, whatever the future holds, it's safe to say that he has had a very strong stint with the Habs. He led them in points last year with 61 and 68, including 22 goals and 39 assists. Philip Deneau, who's one of the most underrated players in all the NHL. I've talked about him plenty. And Deneau, just like I believe a year ago, he was 7th in Selke voting. Just a completely sound two-way centerman with 47 points in 71 games. Max Domi, who then we will get to, of course, had 44 points in 71. Brennan Gallagher, as pesky as he is, you absolutely love to have him on your roster and absolutely hate to go up against him. He is so, not to compare them, but, him and the Marchands of the world, and now you see the Kachucks, those are the perfect type of players to have, especially when you're a team in contention for the playoffs. And Gallagher just gives everything he possibly has every night. 43 points in 59 games. Nick Suzuki, the young gun, a really strong rookie year with 41 points in 71 games. Jeff Petrie, he's just been solid every single year for the Habs. 40 points in 71 games. Their captain, Shea Weber. Weber looked ridiculous earlier in the year, and then he got hurt. And then you were thinking, oh, is he actually out for the remainder of the year? But no, it's Shea Weber. He was only out, I believe, like a week or two, and then he was back in the lineup. I'm pretty sure it had to do with like his foot. But he
like a 4 to 6 week timeline, comes back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Like there was a lot of speculation that he would not be back for the remainder of the year, but he gets 36 points in 65 games, including 15 goals. Yoel Armia, another very underrated forward that I appreciate a lot. Very sound two-way, has 30 points in 58 games. And then Artturi Lehkonen, who I'm interested what your thoughts are going to be on him, 27 points in 70 games. Then when you get down the list, it's guys like Nick Cousins, 22 points, Ben Sherratt, who's really been solid coming over from the Jets, 21 points. And then beyond that, Jonathan Drouin, 15 points in 27 games because of his injuries. Then, that really goes down the line for all the more notable guys, at least. And then you have guys, of course, whether it's Victor Mete, Paul Byron, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who, even though he only had 8 points in 36 games, his progression coming back into the qualifying round in that bubble was, beyond belief. I think that's what all Habs fans were finally hoping to get. And Jesperi, and he's really going to solidify himself going forward as a key top 9, if not for sure, then top 6 centerman or winger, however they want to utilize him for the Habs. But overall, really strong for the Habs. And then you get on to Carrie Price, another stellar season. He had 27 wins, 25 losses, a goals allowed average of 2.79, and I believe he also had a save percentage of .909. And then Caden Primo, who's a very underrated too. I like him a lot. He looks like he might be the next big thing in Montreal when it comes to goaltending. He only had 2 games played, but he had 1 win, 1 loss, and he looked really strong. Had a goals allowed average of 2.52 and a save percentage of .931. And then other guys between Charlie Lindgren, who's Ryan Lindgren's brother. Ryan Lindgren's the defenseman on the Rangers, and then Keith Kincaid, who is actually now part of the Rangers as their third string goaltender. But overall, I think with the Habs, they made huge strides, as we know. The roster looks quite different now too, and we can basically get into that because if we look back in the season at least, we can break down as of now the deals that actually happened and what has come out of them. If you want to start with Ilya Kovalchuk, by all means, go ahead.
So in terms of trading him at the deadline there for a second round pick, was it? I can't even recall.
I believe, yeah, it was a decent pick for literally nothing because they just picked him up. I think it was
a third round pick maybe from Washington.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, just good asset management. We get him for nothing, and then we end up, trading him for a third round pick. So that was a big thing coming off of, we weren't able to salvage the season, but we were definitely able to, help the franchise moving forward, off of assets we didn't have a few weeks prior. So, I think that was, obviously a great move by Mark Bergevin there. And same for Scandella. We get him for a 4th round pick, and then we swap him for a 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. So one of Mark Bergevin's main strengths is that asset management. He just made in the last 3 years 29 picks in the draft, and then we have another 14 picks coming up in this 2021 draft, including 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 in the first 3 rounds. So
doesn't get much better than that. And I think what is crucial too when it comes to this past year's draft, and we can kind of segue into that, if you will, because that is next up on the list. But when it comes to this past year's draft, I believe the Habs had more draft picks than anyone else. If my memory isn't mistaken, they had a ton in this year's draft.
Yeah. I think we went in with 12 or 13, and then what he ended up doing is picking the players he wanted, and then he swapped a few out for the following season now. So the next draft going in with 14. But I think we had quite a strong draft in the 2020 draft, starting with Caden Gooley at number 16, who we are going to get to see play now in the World Juniors for Team Canada.
Yep.
And it's looking like he'll be paired with Justin Barron out of the Halifax Mooseheads. So as from Halifax, that's exciting for me as a Mooseheads fan and as a Canadiens fan. So really going to get a good look into how he plays. And, admittedly, I haven't seen much of him play, but from what I've heard and what I've read and what I've seen in highlight packages, looks very similar to the play style of Shea Weber, maybe with a bit more of a, puck moving ability through the neutral zone more so than Weber. But in terms of the toughness down in the corners in front of the net, big body. I mean, on DB, he's listed at, I think, 185 pounds, but in his most recent scouting profile, I think he's up to 205 or 210, something like that at 6'2" or 6'3". So he's a big boy, and then he's also agile as well on the blue line, and does a great job of getting the puck through. So I'm looking forward to getting a good look at him at the World Juniors here for Team Canada. Hopefully he'll get a big role. I'm sure he will, as Canada loves their role players and the size that he'll bring, especially on the penalty kill.
Yeah, no, Gooley was a little bit of a surprise pick for me, just because when you look at what the Habs had done to that point and how they were addressing the blue line, granted, I know that normally when you draft, you aren't necessarily drafting for a position of need right away, because these players take a couple years at least to develop outside of getting a guy, say, within the first 5 or 10 picks. But Gooley, he's very interesting because he's a really interesting blend of old school and new school. He's not your stereotypical defenseman that you're seeing coming out of the draft nowadays by any stretch of the imagination. He's very defensively sound, and he can definitely take up the puck. And when he wants to go on and use his burst of acceleration, he can make some great things happen. But where he gets a little iffy, for me at least, is his transition game at times. It's one of those where I'm kind of left wanting a little bit more out of him, but he shows a lot of growth and a lot of maturity for his age. And I think that is going to bode well. He has a bigger body as well, and he's going to continue to get bigger, So he is a guy that I think is really going to help the Habs a lot, as by time he comes into the lineup, let's just say, for example, it's within the next 3, 4, tops 5 years, because defenseman normally takes some time. He comes into that spot. He's probably going to be paired along with a guy that maybe isn't as defensively sound, but is more of a puck mover. So he can kind of find that balance of either wanting to focus more as a full through and through two-way defenseman, or if he wants to maybe stay back a little bit more just naturally because the guy on the other side of him is going to be taking up the puck more in the offensive zone. But Gooley, a really strong pick. It wasn't a bad pick by any stretch of the imagination. I think it just surprised me more than anything. I wasn't expecting the Habs to go for a guy like him. But then oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, especially considering how deep the Habs prospect pool is at left defense as well. I'd agree with you there that it was a surprise for me too. But I think I'd say it was a safe pick considering what we're going through right now, the lack of scouting. These guys aren't playing. I think Bergevin and Trevor Timmons, our head scout and our assistant GM, they value the character and attitude. You hear Bergevin say it all the time, and I think he encompasses that very well, and I think that's because of what we're going through, I think that's a wise decision.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we won't have to break down these prospects too much from the draft because we will eventually get to the prospect pool here, but I would just like also to make a note of some of the more notable picks for the Habs, because a guy that I really kind of fell in love with as I was following prospects more leading up to the draft was Jan Mysak. And for the Habs to land him where they did, I'm trying to think if it was the second or the third round, because
second round, 48th.
Yeah, because he fell pretty far when there were numerous scouts that had him in their latter half of the first round. And Mysak is a guy that he's definitely rough around the edges as well, but from him coming into juniors from Czech and playing with the Bulldogs, he really transitioned well, if you ask me. He really played above expectations, and he has a great shot. And in that offensive zone, his playmaking still needs to use some work. He needs to get a little bit more familiarity on North American ice. But to see what he did in that short stint, also, it's not an easy thing for an 18-year-old as it is to go from playing in Europe your entire life to then transitioning to junior hockey like mid-season and having that immediate impact that he did. So I thought that was unbelievably impressive. He has some great speed as well. He has a nose for the net, but he can definitely pick his corners, and is a guy that I think could very well be one of the bigger steals from this draft class, because there was a lot of hype with him within the latter months leading up to the draft. And then also, if you look at another guy as well, and Sean Farrell, or Farrell, I don't know how you pronounce his name. He's really looked great for the USHL. And another steal pick, if you ask me, for the Habs, because he already, many believe, is in the top 10 for their prospect pool. When we get to their prospect pool, the Habs have one of the better prospect pools in all of the NHL already.
Yeah, fourth round for him too, at 124th overall. And I haven't seen a whole lot of him play, but the points, he's at 2 points per game right now.
Yeah, he's
in the
20 and 10. You can't go wrong there.
Yeah, it's impressive. Someone who I would maybe compare him to at this point, maybe a Johnny Gaudreau, who was drafted very late because of his size.
Yeah, exactly.
And then immediately
he is very
looking at it like, why didn't this guy go higher?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And without even getting too much into his game or anything, Johnny Hockey was that example. He already proved himself in the USHL and the US National Development Team leading up to his draft year. Then when he went to BC, he just continued to light it up. But we could find ourselves with a similar situation. But overall, the Habs had a really strong draft. I liked a lot that they did throughout the draft, no question. And then when we get on to free agency and just the offseason as it is, we can even backtrack a little bit. I believe the first major move the Habs did was when they did the trade for Jake Allen with the St. Louis Blues. Yep. That was genius. Absolutely genius. Taking full advantage of the Blues that were trying to conserve money in hopes of keeping their captain, Alex Pietrangelo. They were not able to do that, but they did settle with Torrey Krug, so not bad by any means on their front. But they need to free up cap space, and Jake Allen, who still had at least one more year left on his contract at that time, with a decent cap hit as really a 1B goaltender at that point, made a lot of sense to go to the Habs. And for me personally, as just a hockey fan, I was like, finally, Carrie Price has a tandem here. When you look at, you would know obviously as a Habs fan, when you look at the history for them, they've had some decent backups, no question, but they haven't had a solidified 1B really. That Price, they don't need to worry about him in a normal 82 game season, by far taking the bulk, upwards of 60 games. They don't need that anymore if they don't want to go down that route to make him more fresh for playoffs. Yeah. Because Price.
Yeah, I've said for the last couple of years now, the big reason why the Habs missed the playoffs, even last season where we were quite a ways out in terms of points, but especially in 2018-19, it was because we didn't have a backup. We weren't getting any points in the standings from our backups.
Exactly.
Just last season, I think we got like 6 points or something from our backups. So if Jake Allen can come in off of a season where he had a .927 save percentage for St. Louis and get us 12 wins, we're in the playoffs just because of that, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think what's crucial too is in today's NHL, as we all know, it is a tandem league. It is not a league where you are reliant on your number one to go the bulk of the season. That's just not how things are working, because you need these guys fresh. And it really helps a lot when you have two guys where you can count on basically either one of them on any given night. That's a great security to have as the head coach and management. So Allen coming in, even though he isn't necessarily in the prime of his career per se, he can easily be a fine acquisition for the Habs. Originally from, I believe he grew up a Habs fan as well, a Canadian, obviously. He's going to bring a lot of that to the table for them, and it's really going to be detrimental over these next couple of years until Caden Primo is really solidified as a every single night NHL goaltender. So great move by them, taking advantage of their cap. And then when you go further, Joel Edmondson, I really like that move a lot as well. Edmondson only played 1 year with the Carolina Hurricanes defenseman. Carolina, we know the plethora of defensemen that they already have, and Edmondson looked like he would be on his way out. So they trade him away for a draft pick, at least, to the Habs. And now he's going to find himself probably, if I would assume, it would be on that bottom pair of defense, maybe along a side like Alexander Romanov, and we'll get to him. But really not bad at all. Edmondson is a little bit
strong
more
presence on the PK too.
Yeah,
we're coming off a year with 79% penalty kill, which we definitely needed to improve. That's going to help there big time.
Yeah, he's a little bit more one-dimensional with his game. The analytically driven people don't necessarily love every aspect of his game, but it's fine. For me personally, I love analytics, but I think you have to balance the two. Because at the end of the day, they're only going to tell you so much. So I think Edmondson is going to come in and do just fine. And he just adds depth more than anything. When you look at this Habs blue line there's so many guys that are going to be competing as it is to kind of crack that bottom pair of defense. So Edmondson is really going to solidify himself there. I thought it was a great move overall. And then when you get on to the other moves that the Habs did this offseason, if we want to get on to the biggest trade, and which is really funny considering how close they are in friendship, is obviously Josh Anderson and Max Domi. We all knew the rumors behind Domi. I talked, that's really what really helped spark up my channel when I started talking about these trade rumors and signing rumors, because Domi was a hot topic for a while. Obviously coming from a 70-plus point season over a year ago to having 40-plus points this year. His utilization, obviously in the qualifying round and everything in between, things just didn't look like they were going to last longer in Montreal. And to see him get traded with the Habs for Josh Anderson and the Habs giving up a draft pick, some people believe that was really lopsided. I personally wasn't under that impression, mainly because Josh Anderson was a hot commodity. And not enough people understand that. So many teams are going after Josh Anderson. He was one of the biggest fish on the trade market by far. So if you have to give up,
it's funny you say that, because I spent like 3 or 4 days when that rumor was, as hot as it was. I spent like 3 or 4 days trying to convince Habs fans that it would actually be a incredibly useful acquisition to bring in Josh Anderson, even if we have to trade Max Domi.
He's exactly what they need. They've been needing they've been needing grit in their lineup for the longest time, but they've also been needing skilled grit. You're not just looking for a goon, an enforcer on your fourth line. Josh Anderson is a rare breed, right up there with the Tom Wilson, just not as much of a fighter, where he can put up the 20 plus goals. And yes, I know he had a little to no points last year in his shortened season because of his injuries. So take that into account. Hoping that he's fully healthy and ready to bounce back. And that offense that we see now with Montreal, you can easily expect Josh Anderson to be a 20, upwards of 30 plus goal scorer in a full 82 game season. So he's going to bring a great balance as a power forward that is not common in the NHL today.
Yeah, especially if he's playing with a center like Nick Suzuki or, even Kotkaniemi. Wherever he lines up in the Habs forward core, I think he'll have, plenty of opportunities to pot goals. He's a big body, but the way he can skate and the speed that he can get moving at is seriously impressive. And he's got the shot, and he can score from all areas, and he's got the intimidation factor. And he's not in our bottom six facing up against other checkers. He's going to be in the top six facing up against stars. In an opposing team's top six. So I think that's going to go a long way and continuing to make the Habs a very difficult team to play against.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I just, when you kind of summarize what Bergevin did, and it's so funny because, when it comes to Canadian media, and obviously I don't live in Canada, I live in the States, so it's very different with our outlook on hockey, especially on the state that you live in. But I know that for any Canadian team, the media is just so up in their face, especially Montreal, original six team. Right. Same thing with Toronto. It's always going to be the topic of discussion. So to see Bergevin, who's constantly in the media, more so negative than positive in recent years because people just don't simply understand his moves at first, but gradually they have a positive effect. And huge hats off to him. He's made some very genius moves looking back, and even take the PK Subban deal if we want to go a little bit back farther, because as much of an icon as Subban was in Montreal, on the forefront, that trade did not look like it was benefiting the Habs, at least in my personal opinion. But then Shea Weber bouncing back, getting healthy, and then seeing Subban's slowly but surely decline with his defensive game, which was always his biggest issue. It's pretty crazy. Even with that long contract of Weber, he's a leader in the locker room. He's now the captain, as we know, rightfully so for Montreal. And just another genius move where on the forefront, you probably had the average fan had a very different feeling about it.
Yeah. Humble brag. You go back on my YouTube channel. I've got a video saying that Subban's going to decline first.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. It makes sense because of their playing style. Like the biggest worry with Weber is because of just how worn down he's been. The injuries he's been, he's a warrior. He's just one of those guys. And with those now star defensemen where their contracts just go on forever. It seems like they're going till they're 100. But outside of that, he's a reliable defenseman who he had 15 goals last year. Like, come on. Yeah. He's playing those 1-2s on the left off.
He's always relied on strength and speed, strength and hockey smarts. And that doesn't just leave a guy overnight. Whereas Subban always relied on speed and skill, and that can leave a guy quickly. He relied on that so much in his game. And when it started to kind of, decline a little bit, you could see it very easily that he was struggling out there. And I hope the best for him in New Jersey. I really hope to see him rebound, but I'm very happy with what we got in that trade.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. But before we go further, are there any other acquisitions that I just simply didn't mention that you might have in front of you? Or do you think we covered that?
Yeah, big one. Tyler Toffoli at right wing.
Oh, thank you for reminding me. I knew there was something. It didn't feel right. Yeah, no.
Yeah, bringing him in there is bringing him in there. So we're looking at having Josh Anderson, Brendan Gallagher, Tyler Toffoli, and that leaves Yoel Armia as a fourth line right winger, which is insane. Our right wing depth has gone from one of the worst in the league to probably the best. Like they can do it all. Defend, they can score, get in the corners, forecheck. So I'm really excited for it. And Tyler Toffoli specifically, he's just good in all areas. He doesn't have a weakness. He's strong 5-on-5. He's really good on the power play. So that's going to help us a lot where our power play struggled coming off a season at 17 or almost 18%, which is not good. So yeah, really looking forward to see what he can do in Montreal, especially giving us that depth scoring, which is why we weren't able to knock out the Flyers. So great addition there, especially getting them in free agency and not having to give up anything for them.
Yeah, for a Habs team that, as we know, for years now, has lacked depth scoring outside of their longtime captain Max Pacioretty and Brennan Gallagher. Now they have depth scoring beyond belief. And Tyler Toffoli, they land him on just an over $4 million deal for 4 years. I think it's like $4.5 million AAV. That is a brilliant deal because he easily could have went for more, but between the the flat market and also just having this desire to go to Montreal and really being interested in what Bergevin pitched to him, you couldn't have written it up better if you ask me. So Toffoli adding on to that right wing as it is, and then you have all the other right wingers there in front of him, including guys like Josh Anderson, and then however you want to utilize guys in Gallagher and Tatar, even though I believe Tatar plays more of the left wing with you guys, right?
Yeah, left wing. Yeah. I think I should mention, I think the addition of Josh Anderson is going to make the load on Brendan Gallagher a lot lighter, and we could see some really special things out of Brendan Gallagher where he's not having to face first lines every night, and maybe Josh Anderson gets those assignments. Yeah, no,
I'm glad you brought that up, because when you look at Gallagher, because of the type of play style that he has, he finds himself gaining some unfortunate injuries, and that can really be detrimental, as we know. So to take him out of some of these situations that, looking back, could very well be costly, it's a win-win for the Habs. So very smart in bringing that up as well. But, I think we hit the nail on the head with everything that the Habs have done in the offseason. So now we can really get into the fun stuff, because I love talking about prospects, because the Habs, their prospect pool is brilliant. What they have been able to do, especially with their left defense, there's been some guys that really stood out to me. One of them in particular is going to be Jordan Harris. He's one of my favorite prospects out of actually all the prospects in the NHL, as I've learned a lot more deep diving prospect pools this year. But if this is just my list from the last time I did a Habs prospect video. Looking back, I would probably change one player at number 10, because I would put Farrell or Farrell in there, but I kind of did it as a curveball. But I had Yoel Teasdale, because he just seemed like he's a very underrated, even though the injury that he sustained, I had him in there, but there's good arguments to have him out. But for my top 10, and I have this in my Habs ranking video as well, I have number 1, you have Cole Caufield, and we will get into him. Then you have Alexander Romanov, Matthias Norlander, who I think is very underrated, even with the slow start that he's had in the SHL this year. Caden Primo, obviously, Caden Gooley, and then Jordan Harris, Jan Mishek, Jordan Struble, and Jaden Struble, and then you have a guy like, is it Jordan Brooke?
Josh Brooke.
Josh Brooke. And then Yoel Teasdale. So those guys have really stood out to me. Some of them, it's been interesting with Josh Brooke, especially because he went from really being on a high and really up there in the rankings for Habs prospects, finishing juniors, to having a fairly underwhelming first year in the AHL. Yeah. So if we want to go down, why don't we just start with, I guess, with Yoel Teasdale? What are your initial thoughts on him?
He was an absolute beast in the Memorial Cup in Halifax. I was fortunate enough to watch him play with Ruan Noranda in Halifax through that tournament, and to actually beat the Halifax Mooseheads and win the championship there, and then be named MVP of that tournament. He was just a hound on pucks. He's
a PK machine.
You can't compare him to anything else other than Brendan Gallagher, because that's exactly what he was doing, except with a little more skill and finesse. He's just tons of speed, gets engaged physically in the corners, retrieves pucks well, and then finishes in tight. Not all of his goals are pretty, but they end up in the back of the net. And I was incredibly disappointed to see him go down for injury. Last year, he was going to be a huge piece for Laval, and unfortunately, he missed the whole season. But I'm looking forward to seeing him play with them now that he's healthy. He was, he really could be a key piece for them, and maybe find himself in the NHL one day.
Yeah, exactly that, because he tore his ACL in 2019, unfortunately, which left him out all this past season. But yeah, from all the highlights I've seen him, all the game clips, he was just an absolute animal on the PK and 5-on-5. Just his overall forechecking was just, it was very reminiscent of a guy like Gallagher, if you will. Just so pesky, he's not going to get off you by any stretch of the imagination. And if you look at what he did, at least back in the 18-19 season in his final year in juniors, he racked up 42 points in 29 games, including 24 goals and 18 assists. And you can also mention, too, that yes, he does get the goals in the dirty areas. A lot of them aren't pretty. He can pick his corners, but you'll definitely find him more so closer into the crease, making things happen, and in those corners as well. So very impressed with Yoel Teasdale. I know that he's definitely a sleeper. A lot of people like Sean Farrell a lot more. I perfectly understand that, but just at the time when I did the video, because I think it was like 2 months ago now, that was before the new season for the USHL had started for Sean as well. But getting on now to Josh Brooke, because he's a very kind of controversial prospect, if you ask me. Having a really strong year in juniors where he racked up 75 points in the WHL back in the 18-19 season, including 16 goals and 59 assists. A power play quarterback with some great vision in the offensive zone, who had, yes, an underwhelming first year with Laval only racking up 13 points in 60 games. So what's your initial thoughts on him?
I feel like we got to give him the benefit of the doubt where it was his first professional year. And, and since then he really hasn't had, much opportunity to play because of the pandemic we're going through. So he's definitely a guy you want to see some strides from in his next season with Laval. Hopefully he can, at the very minimum, hold a top 4 spot for Laval for an entire season, and maybe even, find himself in for their top pair and, or top pair and, make some strides with his development, because he was one of our more highly touted prospects just a year or two ago. And he's kind of, because of how many players we've drafted now, and because of his performance in his first pro season, he's kind of dropped down on the organizational depth chart a bit, but, definitely still some talent there. And he's one of the few right-handed defense prospects that we have. We're stacked with lefties, and, him along with Cale Fleury and Noah Juleson are really the only righties we have in the pool right now.
Yeah, Noah Juleson. Oh my God, I haven't heard that name in forever, I feel like.
Yeah. And Juleson Juleson filled a very important role for us in 2018-19 when Shea Weber was out and still rehabbing from his knee surgery and foot surgery. He came in and he played big minutes for us, and he looked like he was, at the point where he was just going to carve out an NHL career at that point. And that's what his, the expectation was. But then he gets hit in the face with a puck in a game against Minnesota, and then gets hit in the exact same place in the face, exact same game, like 2 minutes later. Just so fluky and unfortunate. He was, he finally, got his chance in Montreal, and really it was, and it happened right. Like, I think it was like the game or two after Shea Weber came back. So it would have been perfect for Shea Weber to get his spot back. Noah Juleson slides back down. We move forward. But anyway, it was unfortunate, but hopefully he's a guy that'll, have a big role in Laval this year. If not, sneak his way onto the Habs roster, maybe even as an extra.
Yeah, great point. I'm really curious to see what the future holds for Juleson. Again, very fluky situation there. But getting on to a defensive prospect that very intriguing, really strong on the puck, and has a lot of raw potential, and that is Jayden Struble. Struble, as we know, to start off this year, playing with Northeastern, along with fellow Habs prospect, I believe, in Jordan Harris. He, in fact, has 2 points in 2 games thus far, originally drafted in the second round just a year ago, and he has really looked interesting. I've liked a lot about his game. He's a strong, aggressive D-man, as we know, especially because before then, before Northeastern, he was just coming right out of high school, I believe. He has great acceleration in the offensive zone. He can command the power play as the power play quarterback at times, and he is a smooth passer. So those things have really stood out to me. What are the things that have stood out to him for you?
Well, Bergevin and Timmins both raved about the combine that he had, where he was just, the top of the list in a lot of the, workouts. So there's that. And, I keep having to say it, but he as well was dealt, an unfortunate, set of cards, because he dealt with, I think it was an ankle injury around the time of the U.S. Selection camp for the World Juniors. So he wasn't even, because of the injury, he wasn't invited to the World Junior Selection camp for Team U.S. So it's unfortunate that he might, he could have had a chance to make that team and really display his skill here in a couple weeks. But I'm impressed to see what he can do moving forward. And in his, I think this is his first full season with Northeastern. So
no, exactly. Unfortunate, but is a guy that even with the great depth that they have currently in the prospect pool on the left side, he could find himself in some strong company to maybe crack that roster within the coming years. He just needs to continue to progress, but he's had a strong start to Northeastern this year, and you can't go wrong in that aspect. But next up, we have that we talked about already a little bit in Jan Mysak. Obviously drafted in the second round, as we know, had 25 points in just 22 games playing for the Hamilton Bulldogs, and he racked up a total of 9 points in 26 games in Czech as well during this past season. This year, things are not faring for him nearly as well to start off playing on currently with Czech, I believe on loan to start off the 2021 season. He only has 1 point in 11 games, but that definitely goes in hand with his utilization and everything else. But Mishek is a guy that, again, has a decent transition game. His playmaking looks really nice at times, and other times I'm really feeling iffy about it. He's missed some key passes for sure when he transitioned to North American ice, but I give him the benefit of the doubt. How he impressed in just that short stint, I think, was really unbelievable. But he's aggressive with his, like, when he turns it on going into the offensive zone, when he decides that, hey, I'm going to command things leading up to the rush, then he makes great things happen, and he has some smooth hands as well. So very underrated Jan Mysak, a guy that I think is going to be one of the bigger steals. What are your initial thoughts on him?
Definitely not, I'm definitely not a prospect expert, but another player that I'm really excited to watch in this World Junior Championship. He's going to be playing for the Czech Republic, and I'll be watching him closely, and I'll definitely have more of an opinion on his game after this tournament, and he should have a very prominent role on this team. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure that he will, because Czech normally isn't too deep when it comes to their prospects as it is, versus obviously the big dogs in like the US and Canada, for instance. But Mysak, very interesting. I'm curious how he's going to be utilized going forward, because he can play both the center and the left wing, but mostly played center, especially when he came over to the Bulldogs. But next up, we have Jordan Harris. Jordan Harris, I really like him. I did not know much about him at all until I started deep diving Habs prospects a couple months ago, and he really stood out to me. This kid is so mature for his age. He reminds me a lot, just personally, because I'm a Rangers fan, and a guy like Adam Fox, because of just how smooth he is with his overall game. He has no problem leading up the rush in the offensive zone, but he does not, there is no, he's so composed the entire time, let's put it that way. Every time he's in a high danger, high pressure situation, you don't see him freaking out by any stretch of the imagination. He's just smooth with every single thing he does, and that's what I love about him. Originally drafted in the 3rd round in 2018 by the Habs, in the 2019-2020 season, he had 21 points in 33 games, also splitting time with some of the other defensemen there, including Struble. But this year, he has stood out big time. He has 5 points in just 2 games, I believe, including 2 goals and 3 assists. So Jordan Harris, he's a really nifty skater. He's composed with his decision making, a strong playmaker, just a superior transition game as well, and a guy that man to man has no issue even at the size of 5'11", 185. He's an average size, but just everything is just so balanced about him. And out of all these Habs prospects, I think he has some of the best potential by far to not just be an NHL regular within the coming years, because I would assume he's probably done with college after this year. I think that would make most sense for him to then sign his ELC if he hasn't already, but then to also be a significant part with the upside of being a top 4 defenseman for the Habs within the next 5 years. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I fully agree with you, and I'm glad you brought up the word composure, because I was going to say something similar. He's got really impressive poise with the puck. Just like you said, under pressure, he doesn't panic, and he'll make that extra move, and it'll be the right decision. And then all of a sudden, there's a passing lane open, and boom, it's over there, and it's in the back of the net. So yeah, I'm really excited for this prospect. Habs fans are super, super pumped for him, really looking forward to what he can do over the next year or two, and then make that jump into the NHL.
Yeah, I think when looking back on this prospect pool a couple years from now, Harris is going to be by far one of the biggest bright spots. But
yeah, he's one of the guys that, if I'm not mistaken, he is playing some on the right too. Now, where he's a lefty,
yes,
that helps us. Where he's our prospect pool is filled with lefties. It's nice to have the guys that can play on the right, just like Alexander Romanov.
Yeah, especially at that age as well. Just being so composed and mature to be able to handle either the left or right side D, even on your offhand, that's impressive as it is. So if he can help transition that, that's only going to bode him well that much more going into the NHL level, because it brings so much more flexibility to the Habs and how they want to utilize him. So great point there.
Yeah.
But next up now we have that we already kind of touched on, so we don't have to do a lot more, is Caden Primo, as we know, drafted in the 1st round. 40 points in 64 games this past year, including 11 goals and 29 assists. Had 17 points in 65 games the year prior in the 18-19 season. And from my notes I originally have here, and they hold true, he's a strong passer, really a superb skater as well. He's very agile as it is. More old school, as I mentioned. He's sneaky offensively. So he's a guy that I think for the Habs' sake, they can really utilize him in any which way that they think he's going to be best fit. I think if he goes into the NHL and really is a lot more offensively driven, then great, but they don't need him to, and he would be perfectly fine, I feel like, if they need him to be more of that kind of stereotypical two-way defenseman, where he will contribute when needed, but it's not going to be a first priority. It's not going to be the first thing on his mind to jump in that offensive zone. Not that he can't do it, he's going to just make sure that he is defensively sound through and through. So any additional thoughts you would like to add on Guhle?
Yeah, definitely. It's impressive his skating ability for his size and the agility that he has. Standing still at the offensive blue line. So, looking forward to see what he can do. And for me, the Montreal Canadiens, the way the roster is built right now is our forward core is much younger than our D core. Mm-hmm. So soon, guys like Weber and Petrie, Sherrod are going to be aged out, and we're going to really be looking for replacements, and to get top pair replacements, it ain't easy. So I definitely can see why Bergevin and Timmins are loading up on these defensive prospects now and giving them time to develop before our older defensemen are heading out.
Yeah, you can't have too many defensemen when it comes to depth, that's for sure. But next up now we have Caden Primo, as we already touched on, the towering 6'3", just around 200-pound goaltender, 7th round draft pick in 2017, and he has done nothing short of amazing things leading up to already hitting the NHL level. In his first year in pro hockey, this past year in the AHL for Laval, had 17 wins, 11 losses, 3 overtime losses, a goals average of 2.45, and a save percentage of 908. Not bad if you ask me for your first year in pro hockey.
Yeah.
And then the year before that, playing for Northeastern as well, you see that trend with these Habs prospects. He had 25 wins, 10 losses, 1 OT loss, a goals average of 2.09, and a save percentage of 933. And then he had that cup of coffee in the NHL, as we know. But another guy that's just so composed. I love his maturity, and even for his size, he's very agile. The only thing that I really noticed about his game from now is that he can get caught slipping a little bit, maybe in between his short side, the gap basically in his armpit. That was basically the biggest issue that I've seen in the limited highlights I've seen of him and his game clips. But outside of that, he has strong rebound control. He really takes up a big body in that net, similar to Price, as we know, being a bigger size at 6'3". And just the fact that he has done so well as a 7th round draft pick in 2017 is awfully impressive, because goaltenders, as we know, they can easily take 5+ years to hit the NHL. So the fact that he already has that taste, he knows what it takes to be at the NHL level, playing, I believe he at least had one of those games in the Bell Center. So to have that kind of rush already this young in his career as a 21-year-old is pretty great. So any other notes you would like to add with a guy like Primo?
Again, looking forward to seeing what he can do, really. He was really impressive in the World Juniors for the Americans, and strong in that, but also composed and calm in the big situations. So, and he's got one of the best you could ask for in terms of a mentor ahead of him. So I think he's in the best place possible to really succeed in the position that he plays.
Yeah, I think he very well could find himself as, the next big number one in Montreal when we get closer to a time where Price is clearly in the latter half of his career. Because I don't think we're there yet with Price. He's still playing some great hockey. But, I'd say maybe 2-3 years from now, where things you might want to take Allen out of the equation once his contract is done with. Primo will then, by that point, be at least the 1B, hopefully, for the Habs. But next up, we have a guy that has had a slow start in the SHL this year, but I'm really not going to put it too much past him, because I still think there's plenty there, and that is Matthias Norlander. This kid, originally drafted in the 3rd round just a year ago by the Habs, has easily been one of their better prospects by far. At 20 years of age, he's just been remarkable. This past season, at least leading up into this year, he had a total of 3 points in 13 games in the SHL, but he also had a total of 18 points in 34 games playing for Allsvenskan, which is right below the SHL level, including 7 goals and 11 assists. So this year is a little bit of a different story. He has just 4 points in 19 games played in the SHL, so a little bit worrisome, but he is still a very young man playing against men. So But a couple of things stand out to me, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with him, but from everything that I've seen, his skating is impeccable. Like, he's probably one of the best skaters by far for the Habs and their prospects, going from end to end with ease. Another guy that just looks so composed under pressure. He's not easy to get knocked off the puck by any stretch of the imagination. He's not big in stature. He's only 5'10", 180. So that isn't an issue for him. He has really smooth hands going into the offensive zone. He can command that power play as a power play quarterback, and just he's very aggressive when it comes to pinching in the zone, but he is defensively responsible. So what are your initial thoughts on Noilander? Because he's a guy that it's kind of easy to overshadow him when you have the Cole Caufields of the world, the Romanovs. Now we have Caden Primo, for instance, among others. But Norlander is a player that I think many Habs fans should make sure that they're keeping a lot of tabs on in these coming years.
Yeah, another one I'm really excited for. The quotes we're getting out of Europe about Norlander are, really impressive. He made the jump from the second tier Swedish league into the first, and immediately got himself a top 4 position. And where his offensive game is falling behind just slightly, maybe it's just the transition period for him. His defensive game is I guess really impressing his coaches over there. I read a quote there a few days ago from the Frölunda head coach that of all the offensive defensemen that he's coached, Norlander has the best defensive ability. So that's good to hear. And from what I can see in clips and whatnot, is just high-level hockey smarts. He's really good at anticipating plays and breaking them up, and then quickly the puck's heading the other way. So he's got a really great transition game, and it's good to see yet another strong defensive prospect in the Habs pool.
Yeah, and I think that's a great note to add as well, because even if, say, he is having a slight decline in his point production, the fact that is if he has gained his defensive game down first and foremost, that is what's going to take him to the NHL level. Doesn't matter how high flying of an offensively minded defenseman you are, but if you aren't, even at least a little bit competent in your defense, then it's going to be awfully difficult for you to have more opportunities at the NHL level. That's just reality. But if you can be more defensively sound, then things can definitely go your way. So Norlander, still plenty to give. I'm not worried about him at all, truly. But next up, we have the guy that all Habs fans are ecstatic for next season, and that is Alexander Romanov. A perfect example of a guy that isn't putting up a lot of points, as we know, in the KHL level, but he has that expectation and possibly have a ceiling of anywhere between 35 and 40 plus points at the NHL level eventually in his career. Because what he's done in juniors was remarkable these past couple of years for Russia. Just another great skater. Throws his body around like no tomorrow. If you look at those hip checks, they're just ridiculous, especially at only 5'11", 180. He's just been awesome. 7 points in 43 games played this past year in the KHL, and 4 points in 43 the year prior. Just as a teenager, for the most part, playing the KHL, he's been amazing. He's been so much fun to watch. He's so entertaining, and he can definitely shoot the puck as well. The opportunities that were given to him playing in juniors against kids more of his caliber, because it just shows you the difference from a level of, say, playing in juniors versus playing against men in the KHL. It's impressive enough what he was doing against people in Russia, but going up against kids his level, he was just, he was otherworldly in my opinion. So a great transition game, has soft hands, can really shoot the puck. What is your excitement level for Romanov, and what is your expectation for him heading into the 2021 season?
Heading into this season, I'm definitely expecting a solid, tough defenseman that's really going to surprise a lot of opposing NHL players that are going to be streaking down the wing, and they're going to see this small statured kid, and then all of a sudden they're going to be staring up at the ceiling. I cannot wait to watch him play. And you mentioned it, how strong he played in the World Juniors as an 18-year-old named defenseman of the entire tournament. And if you look back at the 10-year history, I got it listed here of who won that. It's all like outside of a couple names, it's top pair guys: Pietrangelo, Ellis, Trouba, Ristolainen, Werenski, Shabbat, Dahlin, and then Romanov. So yeah, I'm really excited to see him play. What's that?
Pretty good company.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited to see him play. And one thing I will say is I think, he's kind of gathered a name for himself already around the Montreal fan base. I think maybe some people are hyping him up just a little too much in terms of what his offensive output will be. I definitely think that'll come in time, but for the first year, 2, maybe 3, I think it'll, at first he'll just be a very reliable, smart shutdown defenseman. And then over time, as he gains confidence and experience in the NHL, that offensive game will flourish. But in the short term, regardless, I'm still really hyped to see him play, and I think he's going to really help the Montreal Canadiens depth on their decor for sure.
Oh, exactly. And you don't need him to provide much of any offense going into next season. You just want to get his feet wet finally at the NHL level. So, when you have guys like Petrie and Weber and even Schrott to an extent from him, you don't need to worry about him really getting much power play time. If you do, great. But at the same time, just ease him into the NHL, no rush, and he's going to thrive. So, yeah, plenty of reasons to be ecstatic about Romanov next season. But now we have the one and only Cole Caufield. Coffield is it's really hard to put into words just how fantastic this kid is, because when leading up to the draft just a year ago in 2019, he fell to the Habs at 15. Normally you think, all right, just around the halfway mark of the draft, that's not falling. But for a guy of Cole Caufield's caliber, he is the perfect example of teams continuing to undervalue guys that are undersized. Because at 5'7", 162 pounds, I understand the worry. But how many times have we seen this? Alex DeBrincat, a prime example, just for the Chicago Blackhawks, fell out of the first round. I believe he won the second round a couple years ago. He has the potential to easily be a 40-plus goal scorer at the NHL level. Just a lethal weapon who had a down year, but he's going to bounce back. Then you look at Johnny Gaudreau. Same thing with Braden Point as well, going in the second or third round. And so many of these other players, even Jake Gensel to an extent, just so many names in recent NHL history in particular. And it's just baffling, because even with Caufield, in my mind, he was easily a top 5 talent. So to see him drop as far as he did to the Habs, he was the perfect fit for the Habs. The Habs have been known to have those smaller statured forwards that have a good grit for the net, and Caufield is exactly that, but beyond belief. As we know, this past season, at least for Wisconsin, his freshman year, 36 points in 36 games, including 19 goals and 17 assists. This year, he has 12 points in 10 games, 6 goals and 6 assists. But as we know, he has stood out because he is the best goal scorer in the history of the U.S. National Development Team, breaking records. We're talking passing Phil Kessel and Austin Matthews. I think that's pretty good, right? So
a little bit.
Yeah, he did amazing between his 28 games in the USHL and his final year there. He had 29 goals for a total of 41 points. And his exhibition games, he also had a total of why am I getting my stats mixed up here? In his exhibition games, he had a total of 43 goals, 16 assists for 59 points. And that's where the goal record was broken. But just amazing. And what he's doing now, he's just a guy that literally, in any which way in that offensive zone, he will pick that corner. He has that lethal shot with that 1T in the left dot or the wrister. Has no problem getting in front of the net as well. If he needs to dive in and get into the crease to make a goal happen, maybe on a 2-on-1 or whatever, it's not an issue for him. And that's what I love about his game. He's done everything. He's been breaking records since he was a kid. He's been dominant at every single level. And again, he's still being overlooked, underappreciated because of his size. I could go all day talking about this man. But what are your thoughts on Cole Caufield?
Yeah, yet again, another prospect I'm hyped to see play, especially again in this World Junior Tournament, where the last one he a little bit underutilized and didn't really get to show off what he can do. So hoping that he has a big role here. It's looking like he's lined up on the first line for the Americans. So looking forward to seeing him play in the World Juniors. And he's just a natural goal scorer. Like, he's got a knack for the net, and he can score in every different way. The wrister with changing the angle of his blade there before he throws one on net. Picking those corners, and just the velocity of his shot for such a small guy is unbelievably impressive. And he just hits angles that you don't think he'd be able to hit. You may have mentioned this when you went through your stats, but in his freshman year for Big Ten, he led the whole Big Ten with 36 points in 36 games. And then this season in the Big Ten, he loses the majority of the talent and his centers off the team. And he's still, on fire, 12 points in 10 games, and kind of having to do a little bit more himself, but he's managing to make it work. He's working on his defensive ability, which is good to see. So he's committed to getting better in all areas. And can't wait to see this guy in a Habs uniform.
Yeah, and I think one great thing to note, and I've touched on this in the past, but in his freshman year with the University of Wisconsin, they were star-studded and every single thing went wrong. Between having Alex Turcotte, Keandre Miller from the Rangers, Dylan Holloway, who's still currently with them, I believe, among others, they were loaded, and the Badgers just couldn't get things rolling. It almost looked like they had too many great personalities there. It was kind of a head-scratcher to see them not fare as well as they should have, but to see him thriving, he already had a hat-trick this season, I believe, playing for the Badgers. He's he's just great. I don't know what else to say. Like, honestly, as a both a hockey fan and a Rangers fan, I'm just like, I wish nothing but the best for him. He has the potential to be literally the best goal scorer for the Habs, and I don't even know how long. That's just how good he is. But I think we really hit the nail on the head with all these prospects. We could talk about others, but these were really the top 10 in my opinion. But go ahead.
Yeah, before we move on, can I mention a couple other ones?
Oh yeah, sure. I have a feeling
a little bit off the board here. First, Ryan Poehling.
Yes, he showed up. I'm glad you brought him up.
Yeah, he showed up to their return to play out of shape, and the team had to send him a bit of a message there. They didn't even give him a sniff of playing time, and he's kind of taken that to heart. I noticed in, this is kind of trivial, but I had noticed in his Instagram profile that he was getting slim, and you could tell he was really getting into shape after the return to play happened. And then go figure, we start seeing articles coming out that, he really took that message to heart where he didn't get to play, and he's kind of, tried to hone in his game. So I'm looking forward to, him hopefully rebounding. His first season in Laval wasn't, anything too impressive, but I mean, he was named MVP of the World Juniors just a couple of years ago for the Americans, despite them not even winning the gold medal. He still got that MVP award. He's kind of, because of how stacked the Habs prospect pool is, he's kind of, fallen down, and kind of some fans have forgotten about him a little bit, but he's still a guy that could rebound. And whether or not he gets to eventually play on the Habs, I think he's still a sound prospect that could even be, used in a trade to bring something else to the Montreal Canadiens.
And he may very well thrive with the Habs this upcoming season, assuming if there's an expanded roster format in place. That could really bode well for him just staying with the team in practice. If he really stands out in practice, he could find himself cracking that bottom six. So Poehling, I remember when he first came in the AHL, I believe wasn't his first game like a hat trick.
I know.
No, it's very similar to like what happened with Morgan Geekie this year for the Carolina Hurricanes. He had a really strong stand, just a couple games, but Poehling, between the injuries that he's done, really underperforming, not showing up right to the bubble, to say the least. It's nice to see him taking these to heart, and for a young man, putting that in perspective and not really getting upset about it, but rather just taking full advantage and saying, hey, okay, I need to get my act together. If he's doing just that, then only good things are going to happen for him going forward. So, I completely agree.
Yeah. That, and I think his direct competition, because of how strong this player has looked in the NHL in the short stint he's been there, and in Laval, is Jake Evans. Like, he came out of university, I think at 23 years old, and he looks incredible. Like, the transition, it was almost non-existent. He came into the AHL in his first professional year, and just went off and took over a top six role right away, and looked like the better prospect between the two, down on that team. And then he comes into the NHL and he's rocking like a 52% face-off percentage in 13 games as, a rookie, and, just a strong skater, and he's, smart as well, responsible defensively. So I think those two guys are going to be battling it out in training camp and throughout the season to be getting minutes, which is good to see.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's good to have that friendly competition, if you will. It makes you want to one up that much more, versus if, say, you're on a team, for example, that's in a full rebuild, and that you're kind of locked into a top 9 spot. It could make you feel a little bit overly confident about yourself, when in reality it might be a slap in the face once you hit the NHL level. So no harm, no foul there. But is there any other prospects that you want to touch on?
No. I think we covered quite a few.
Okay. All right, great. Yeah, no. So I think to get to the conclusion of this video, I know we've been going an hour on here, so I'm hoping that everyone watching at least grabbed a thing of popcorn or whatever and is enjoying themselves. But I think what we can say about the Habs and why their future is so bright, is why the reason I had you on here is all these factors in between. The Habs went from a team that had a very dark looking future, if you'd ask me, a prospect pool that was not standing out nearly enough for how they were performing, not fully committing to a rebuild. They're kind of in that retool slash thing, not too far off from other teams that we've seen. Myself being a Rangers fan, I can tell you that personally. But the Habs have really been strategic in their decision making, and it's paying off in dividends. And between guys like Nick Suzuki, how well he's done and how great of a trade that is looking like for the Habs, really both ways, but especially for the Habs, because Suzuki looks like he has that potential to be a star centerman in the NHL one day. And yes, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who, as you would know, obviously is a Habs fan, a lot of people were not feeling too great about him when he was originally drafted, because it was, in fact, drafting to address a need for a guy who wasn't ready at the NHL from the start. But now, seeing what he did, taking time during the months off, really starting to work on his body and frame more, working on everything about his game, stood out heavily in the quality. I can't stress it enough how good he looked during the short stint in the playoffs. And, he very well, those two in particular could very well kick out the door for, I know you probably don't want to see it, but a guy like Philip Deneau, it's going to be curious what the future is for him. But it's a good problem to have at the end of the day because of just how well these young kids are doing. And between having the depth and the veteran leadership and this prospects, the Habs are in a prime position to not just be a solid team, but to be a continuous playoff contender for the next 5+ years. And that's why I think they have such a bright future, balancing all those things. I can only imagine what their ceiling is going to be when they have a Cole Caufield in the reins in his prime and Alexander Romanov on all 4 cylinders and everyone else in between.
Yeah, as a Habs fan, I'm incredibly hyped for what the next 5 to 10 years will bring, because not only do we have, such a star-studded prospect pool, but if you look at our forward core, the majority of them are just entered or about to enter the prime of their career. Even a guy like Phil Deneau, he's still improving despite being, 27 years old. And, the performance that Kotkaniemi and Suzuki put together in the return to play, albeit really impressive, was a very short sample size. So, I still think Phil Deneau has a lot of worth for the Montreal Canadiens. He's got a year left on his deal, but I'm hoping they extend him to really, just like some of the other prospects in the pool, not to hand over the top 6 roles to Kotkaniemi and Suzuki right away. Like, I think Suzuki is a little bit closer than Kotkaniemi.
Oh,
I think
definitely.
From the moment that Kotkaniemi was drafted, he was going to be a project, because the way that he plays, he's not a skill and finesse guy. And he's not the biggest guy in the world either, but he ain't small. He plays aggressive, and the closest comparison I have to him, and I've been saying it for a couple years now, is Ryan Getzlaff. And it takes a while before you can fill out and play that type of style game.
Mm-hmm.
That low center of gravity, really getting aggressive down in the corners to retrieve pucks, and passer first, but still has that underrated shot. So really looking forward to what both of those guys can do. But then even Drouin, again, entering his prime. Lehkonen, scored 18 in his rookie year, hasn't been able to put it together since, but another guy entering his prime. So Anderson, Toffoli is in the middle of his prime. So I think in the current stage, Montreal's looking very good to, maybe not be an elite team in terms of their skill, but I think their depth and 5-on-5 ability, depth scoring, and the decor